Hello and welcome to my full bookshelf. This is Federica and today I'm just going to wrap up the books I read in the month of May. Today's the 2nd of June and May was a great reading month. So this month I read a total of 6 books and 1 graphic novel, which I can consider a pretty good reading month. I'm not one of those people that just read 10-12 books every month, so it's a solid month for me. I don't usually read graphic novels, and the one I read this year is Daunt Profondo, Nero. It's an Italian graphic novel. I believe that Daunt is an Italian graphic novel sort of story that's been going on for decades. And the funny thing with this is that my dad used to read the original ones when they first came out. So in a house that we have back in Italy, there was the first edition, the very first #1 and all that. In 2018 this one came out, and the reason why I wanted to buy it, I don't usually buy it, the reason why I really wanted it was because it was, the story is by Dario Argento, who's an Italian director who usually does a lot of very unsettling, quite terrifying in a lot of instances, films. And I was really curious to see how this character, who's usually sort of like chasing spiritual beings, it's sort of like a dark graphic novel per se, but then I want to see how this particularly dark director tried to incorporate some elements of cinematic production into a graphic novel. One thing that I really loved is that you can definitely tell that there is somebody who usually directs films behind this story. The story itself is fairly linear and simple. It's about, so this character is in London, bumps or believes he's seeing an old friend, gets out of a car, follows that friend, ends up at this sort of exhibition about BDSM photography, very unsettling per se, and then a whole mystery unfolds, and without giving away the ending, there is a lot of sort of mystic, gothic elements coming into play in this graphic novel, and the way like the images are just absolutely beautiful. I love the drawings per se. The director who wrote the sort of who wrote the graphic novel for this edition did not do the illustrations themselves, but obviously you can tell that there was probably a lot of storyboarding going into that, and already seeing the images portrayed this way, and also a lot of pages are quite silent and very graphic. You can tell that there is this sort of cinematic element being brought into a graphic novel. I really enjoyed it. I don't know how to rate it. I had fun reading it, and I don't know if it's been translated or if you want to read it in Italian, but if you do, that's Daunt, written by Dario Argento, and the name is Profondo, Nero. Right, moving on to the second book. I started reading this book, which is If We Were Villains by ML Rio, in April, and I finished it in the first week of May. At first I was thinking of doing some sort of reading blog, but then I decided against it because I just got bored of filming myself reading this book, to be honest, and I don't think anybody would have enjoyed that footage. To put it in short, this is a dark academia novel that follows the lives of, how many students are there? 7? 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, yeah, 7 students who are in this elite college in the United States. They study drama with a specific focus on William Shakespeare's plays and all that. They are in the final year. It's 4 years of college, and they are in the final year, and they are like, the entire class is made up of these 7 people plus 2 main tutors. The reason why I picked up this book is because I saw it in a video by Leonie from the book Leo, and she was talking about it, and from the way she was describing it, it sounded something very much in line with Donna Tartt's The Secret History. As you will probably know from my previous reading wrap-up, I absolutely loved reading The Secret History, and I was left craving the sort of very unsettling setting in, you know, the US campus sort of life vibe and so on. There is this group of friends, tightly knit, and then there is a tragic event. One of them dies, and from then on a lot of storylines sort of spiral out of that specific event. You know from the start that one of the people involved in this book has been convicted with murder of this person, but we do not know until the very end whether this person is guilty, this person is not guilty, or how this sort of tragic death happened. What we do know is that something has happened after this death that has brought the group of people that were involved in this tragic event or that witnessed this tragic event to sort of distantiate each other from the others. I decided to use tabs to sort of see who I thought was responsible and who I thought was sort of more guilty than other people. And you can see I've used color codes to sort of differentiate the various plots. So at first I could definitely tell that one of them had been involved in some way, and I've marked that with pink, and then the rest is pretty much green. And by the end of it, like the last 100-ish pages, yeah, about the last 100 pages, I was convinced of how it was going to end in terms of who had done it, if there was somebody responsible for that, how that happened, and also how sort of the story unfolded and why we were following this character that had been convicted and whether he was responsible for this or not. I was not particularly satisfied with this book. Better. This book came to do what it was expected to do, which was entertain, deliver a story, and then, you know, let me get on with my life. It was not a 5-star read. It was a very pleasant 3-star read. I feel like for me 3-star is a book that delivers what it came to deliver, and in this case it's a mystery thriller with a little bit of element of academia. I felt like it was just a little bit too much sometimes in terms of narration, description and so on. I do like reading a book that is long and descriptive if that description leads to something, but it felt like, especially in the middle part, there was a lot of description of events, of characters, that was not leading to anything, and it was not leading anywhere in terms of the plot itself. So that left me a little bit like, oh, I read, but it didn't really matter whether I read that bit or not. The other thing that I didn't particularly like is that the characters were very much one-dimensional. So you have the stereotypical bad guy, the stereotypical good guy, the stereotypical beautiful lady, the stereotypical ingenious character and all that, which is fine. I want to believe that this was an ingenious way for the narrator to sort of bring elements of Shakespeare's plays into the actual book, because Shakespeare characters tend to be quite one-dimensional in a way. The other characters that people need to recognize and be able to say, I'm rooting for that guy, I want that person to die, I want that person to win, and so on. So I feel like maybe it was a nudge to Shakespeare, but also at the same time it didn't feel like it was necessarily. So it sort of left me a little bit like, oh, maybe it could have been much better, but it was a 3-star, it was a solid book. I would recommend it to somebody who wanted some sort of mystery thriller that had some elements of academia in it. So yeah, pick it up if that's what you're looking for, but if you're undecided between reading this or The Secret History, don't think about it twice, go for The Secret History. And after reading that, I wanted to do a reading vlog with a specific book, but it hadn't arrived. So I decided that I was going to start a book, and if I didn't finish it, it didn't matter. And if I did finish it, great, by the time the other one arrived. So I decided to pick up something that had been sent to me back at the beginning of last year. This is a proof copy of the paperback of Holly Bourne's How Do You Like Me Now? So this story is about the main character, whose name I can't remember right now, and she, while she was in her 20s, she had this sort of very inspiring trip, like physical trip. She went to the US and backpacking, and she met somebody, and she wrote a book off the back of that, some sort of self-help book about her 20s and how to tackle them, and she became quite famous for that. So the book was very well received. It inspired a lot of people to sort of follow their dreams and follow their ambition and all that. And now she's in her 30s and she can see that life around her is changing. So she has friends getting married, she has friends having children, she has friends sort of like going through stages of their lives that are more advanced, or where the main character feels like she is. She is in a stable relationship with somebody, but at the same time she's not fully satisfied, and she tries to sort of be happy. But at the same time, there is a lot of discussion about social media and the role of social media in contemporary society when it comes to feeling fulfilled and feeling happy, and the validation we get out of social media and other people liking their posts, for instance, and all that. I gave this book a 1 star, no, was it 2? 1 or 2, so basically if I could give it 1.5 star, I'll give it 1.5. I think I might have given it 2 in the end. I was very dissatisfied with this book. I felt like it was very, very easy. Just to give you an idea, this is 400-ish pages, yeah, around 400 pages, and I read it in 1 day. You could see where the story was going since the very beginning. Every single storyline was incredibly predictable. The main character is she is real in a way that I was reading it and I was thinking of a very specific person, and I feel like if anybody reads this book, they're going to have a specific idea of a person while they read it. But that being said, while I do like the person in real life, I also felt like the story itself was very, very plain. I think I remember now why I gave it 2 stars, because there is discussion of abusive relationships, and I feel like it's important to talk about those topics, but at the same time it felt like it was done in a very rushed and in a very basic way. The main character in the story was victim of emotional abuse by her partner. I am giving this away, but at the same time I wouldn't recommend you to read this book, and also you will be able to figure that out within the first 20 pages, so it's not giving too much away. But anyway, I feel like it was done in a way that it clearly portrayed a good guy being the main character and a bad guy being the other person in the relationship. But at the same time, I feel like the main character was also being quite abusive sometimes towards that person. I feel like there was this clear lack of communication between them that made it quite infuriating to read. But anyway, I read it, didn't like it, 2 stars. I do appreciate the effort, also especially when it comes to talking about social media and the validation that comes out of it, but it's nothing new, and it was so predictable. The characters were just very one-dimensional again. I just wouldn't read it again. I'm going to get rid of this copy and don't think about it again. Well, after that, my book finally arrived, and as you will have probably seen from my reading vlog, I decided to pick up Station 11. I'm not going to go too much into details with this, because if you want to hear what I thought about it, and if you want to hear more about the plot itself and how it develops, do check out my reading vlog. I'll link it down below. But basically this book is about, it's a dystopian novel that deals with a pandemic that wipes up a big chunk of the population on Earth. And it follows there's storylines. The main one is, I always forget her name, Kirsten and Arthur. No, Kirsten is the main character that we follow as the majority of the book unfolds, which is 20 years after the pandemic. And then there is Arthur, and his story unfolds before the pandemic. And then there is another, can't remember his name, another character whose storyline sort of unfolds alongside the other 2 storylines. It was interesting, it was fun, and the reason why I picked it up is because I wanted to see what it felt like to read about a pandemic as we go through a pandemic. And it was quite nice to take my mind off the actual events and read about something that seems so similar but at the same time so completely unrealistic in terms of how it's going to evolve in 20 years, because I want to believe that in 20 years we're not going to reach the same level that this book has reached. But yeah, I gave it 4 stars. It was fun to read, but not fun as a story. It had nice characters that were developed, but not too much, so it sort of left a lot to the imagination in terms of descriptions and in terms of sort of giving them a bit more of a personality, because you could see little bits and pieces here and there, and then it was sort of up to it is up to the reader to creating a whole picture of the one person based on the tiny key elements that you get here and there. So that was nice. I think had I read this in other circumstances, I would probably given it 3 to 3.5 stars. There was a lot of sort of emotional element, especially towards the end. You will see that I cried reading the end of this book just because it gave me a lot of hope, and it was just really nice and sweet. So do pick it up if you need a little pick-me-up about the current situation, and at the same time you feel like you could do with a sort of dystopian kind of book. Session 11 it is. The next book I read it on my Kindle, and it's, you can probably see your own reflection here, but is Love at the Time of Cholera by Gabriel García Márquez. And I read this, it was a reread for me. The first time I read it, I believe I was 14, and I read the Italian translation because it was just at home. And I remember from that experience reading it, but not really enjoying it. But I decided to read it in Spanish, just to see how different it felt, the language, how different language felt and how different the narration was. I read part of it in English, part of it in Spanish, both on my Kindle, and I enjoyed it. It was a 5-star read. The story itself is a love story. As the title might suggest, there is something else to do with cholera as well. The story follows this couple of people, who are not a couple. There is Fermina and there is Florentino, I believe. Yeah, Florentino. There's 2 stories, there's 2 people, and they sort of see each other when they are teenagers, young teenagers, like 13 and 15. And they think they fall in love, and they start exchanging letters, and they start exchanging promises, and they believe that they are destined to end up together, and they want to get married, and then they get busted. People find out, and they're like, especially on the girl's side, the father is like, nope, this is not happening, we go away. So she goes traveling with the father, and they spend time with some other relatives, and the boy is left behind, sort of soul crushed. And from there, their stories continue in 2 very different ways, because then there is the moment in which the girl returns to the original city and they see each other again. And what happens, we know, because at the beginning we know that this girl is now married to somebody else. Now she's in her 60s and she's married to somebody else, so we know that something has happened, that the story has not ended like a fairy tale, but at the same time we sort of feel like we care about this storyline between these 2 teenagers. What I liked so much about it is not the story itself. As I said, the story is fairly simple, but what I liked about it is that it's incredibly smart. The language is very smart, as in it gives little clues here and there. It's full of similitudes, it's full of metaphors, it's full of symbolism. There is this sort of, like, you realise that there are so many meanings to the title itself, because the title is Love at the Time of Cholera, and you think, okay, there's a cholera pandemic and there are lovers. But then the more you read, the more you realise that sort of cholera is this, is sort of a way to describe love itself. And there are so many things scattered here and there in the book itself that just make you feel like this author had so much to say, but he also wanted to create a book that was able to attract a reader that wanted to have some sort of superficial reading of it. Because if you want to have a very sort of superficial reading of it, it's just a love story, and it's a really entertaining love story, and you should definitely read it that way. And it's how I read it when I was 14, but then now, almost 14 years later, I read it, and I read it thinking of the language itself, thinking of the political context when it was written, thinking of what he was actually trying to portray in the book, because this book was written in I think it was published in 1985. It was poorly written before that, but still, it talks about a period that is just the turn of the previous millennium, so going from the 1800s into the 1900s. So society was incredibly different, and there are so many things in this book that didn't quite work out. Like, they wouldn't work out right now. There was a storyline between an old man and a teenage girl that really wouldn't work out right now, but at the same time it sort of works. And I was left wanting to read more by this author. I've read something of his, but mostly non-fiction, so I would like to read some more. But yeah, I was just amazed, and I gave this book 5 stars. And it's not an easy read because it's not too big. It's like almost 400 pages, but at the same time it's not it's not a quick read, and you sort of want to take your time, but it's absolutely fine, and it's so beautiful. I loved it. This book is At the Pond, Swimming at the Hampstead Ladies' Pond. It's a collection of short essays, stories of women who actually went to swim at a pond in Hampstead Heath. Hampstead Heath is a park, I guess you could say it, a heath in North London, and there are 3 ponds. One is a men's pond, one is a mixed pond, and one is the ladies' pond. I believe they were man-made during the Victorian era? Don't quote me on that. Coronavirus as an exception, they're usually open every day of the year from 7 o'clock in the morning until 7 at night, 8 at night. I think it depends on the season. But that means that people swim when there is beautiful sunny weather like today, or they swim there in the middle of winter when there is ice on the surface. And it just collects all these experiences of women that have been there, how they felt. Some of them are not necessarily strictly about the pond, they're more about the connection with the water that these women have. And it was just beautiful. I read this strictly in the morning. Out here I have a little bit of back garden, and I've been waking up at 6 o'clock in the morning for the past couple of weeks just to get in the garden and read before the day starts. And I read this just in the mornings, just because I loved going outside and listening to the birds and feeling connected to nature without being out in the open and potentially being, in contact with the virus and all that, but at the same time feeling really connected to nature. And it was beautiful. It was such a beautiful collection of stories. I gave this 5 stars, and I don't know, I feel like I put it down, but I was like, oh no, I don't want to finish it. And it was just so beautiful, and yeah, pick it up. And finally, we come to the book that I finished just a couple of days ago. I literally finished this on the 31st of May, not because I was challenging myself to, but just because I couldn't put it down. And this book is Spring by Ali Smith. As you might or might not be able to see, up there I have also autumn and winter, and they all sort of revolve around the theme of Brexit, but they're done in a really smart way. It's Brexit through the lenses of very specific individuals within British society, and the way the stories are told is very much similar to what a lot of people, as either foreigners or immigrants or people who voted for Brexit or people who've been against Brexit throughout the entire period, have perceived very different aspects of their lives. In this specific book, it follows three main storylines, and you don't understand how interconnected they are until the very end. But it follows the storyline of a TV script writer / producer who's been tasked with correcting / editing / producing this sort of new TV series about some writers from the past. Then there is sort of like a security guard at this immigration facility, and there is a young girl. And you don't understand why you're reading about these 3 people until the very end, when you realise that their stories are connected. This book is so smart because it can be read, again, just like I said about Love at the Time of Cholera, it can be read in 2 different keys. One key could be simply about the story. So simply the story of 3 individuals who somehow end up in the same car at some point. The other way it could be read is that this is a story of Brexit affecting 3 people in 3 extremely different ways. Other than Brexit, then it expands and becomes way more specific. Rather than about Brexit, which was the case with Autumn, it becomes more specific about immigration and the Windrush situation and all those issues that a lot of refugees and political refugees and so on find when they come to Britain. But obviously you can still see that there is a sort of Brexit thread going through the books and connecting all 3 of them so far to one another, even though the stories do not connect to one another. I think this is probably one of the best books I've read this year, but also one of the best books that I've read in the past few years. I did not think that there could be a book written by Alice Smith that I could like more than Autumn, but this has definitely topped Autumn. And it's a fantastic book. It's so careful and so vivid, and you can tell that there has been a lot of research going on in terms of how to describe some specific events, how to describe some specific people. It has some elements also that remind me a little bit of Murakami, the sort of fable, fairy tale almost elements here and there, and you feel like you're almost reading something that should not be about politics, or that it's not about politics, and then you realize that all these elements are actually just people helping one another, and it's something that could happen should people decide to do that. So it was a great read. As you can probably imagine, if I have not mentioned that already, I gave it 5 stars, loved it. Please pick it up. If you haven't read the other ones, I would say definitely start with Autumn, because it sort of gives you an overview of what you're getting yourself into, and it's also a little bit smaller than this and that Winter. But yeah, beautiful, beautiful book. Also, that leads me to the end of this reading wrap up for the month of May 2020. Thank you so much for watching. I will link down below my reading blog for Station 11, but also links to where you can find all these books. As I said in my previous sit-down reading wrap-up, I'm still sort of new to this sort of sit-down word of YouTube, so if you have any comments or if you have any suggestions or things you liked or didn't like, do leave a comment down below, and don't forget to subscribe if you're interested in more videos like this. Thank you very much. Bye!